Hello, everybody. My name is George Reistad. I am a business development specialist with the city of Madison, focusing specifically on food systems. So I wanted to take a bit of time to, put together an informational presentation, webinar style, to talk about the Healthy Community Food Systems Fund, and really specifically to talk about the Community Food Access Competitive Grants Program that the city has launched and that are due on Friday, January 29th at 5 p.m. So again, I wanted to talk a bit about the Healthy Community Food Systems Fund as this umbrella fund and give a bit of background as to how it came about and how it was created. But then again, I'm going to spend the bulk and the majority of this informational session really talking about the Community Food Access Competitive Grants Program, because that is the program that community organizations can apply for and probably what most people have questions about. So that is what I will focus the vast majority of my time on. So again, just an overview. Like I said, we'll go over the fund itself, and then we'll do mostly a walkthrough of the competitive grants program. So by way of background, we're in early 2021 now. We all know that 2020 was a very challenging year. There were profound changes within our society and challenges that our cities especially were facing around the country's racial reckoning in the wake of the George Floyd murder, as well as the public health and economic fallout from COVID-19. And so, we as city staff and, the mayor and policymakers understood all of that. And so for 2021, all of those folks, again, the mayor, policymakers, staff, members of the Madison Food Policy Council, worked together to repurpose existing funds in the city's budget into an umbrella fund, the Healthy Community Food Systems Fund, which will be able to support community food systems investments in a variety of ways. Again, for the sake of this presentation, this informational session, I will be focusing on the Community Food Access Competitive Grants Program. Again, just to back up, that is a page that we have up on the city's webpage through the mayor's program, specifically under food, and that is where all of the materials are housed right now to be able to apply for the grants program. The background letter is up there. This webinar recording will be there as well. So that is the program that community orgs can apply for. The other two programs housed under the Healthy Community Food Systems Fund, which is the Rapid Food Access Food Entrepreneur Support Program. That program, the funding under that is being actually directly contracted out through a resolution that Common Council adopted a couple of weeks back to support community feeding programs within the city. And then the third bucket or third component of the Healthy Community Food Systems Fund around regional food systems planning is something that the Madison Food Policy Council and the Dane County Food Council are working on. So again, the competitive grants program is kind of the community facing pot of money. And we'll jump into talking about that right now and walking through elements of that program. So there's $150,000 in approved funding to support the Community Food Access Competitive Grants Program. For folks who are watching this that are familiar with the city's seed grants program, again, just to provide an update, basically what's going on here is that money from the 2021 seed grants program was folded in with past fiscal years funding from the Healthy Retail Access Program to form the $150,000 that is available for the Community Food Access Grants. So for 2021, the Community Food Access Grants will actually be replacing the seed grants. And instead of $50,000, which had historically been the baseline for seed grants, there will be $150,000. So it's a significantly larger program. Additionally, in past years, seed grant individual contracts or individual grants were maxed out at $10,000 for this particular program. The maximum individual grant amount is $25,000. So again, another pretty significant increase. Just to get into some of the context around what these proposals should focus on and what reviewers will be looking for, we are specifically looking for proposals that focus on alleviating food security issues within our community. Now, proposals that center COVID response strategies and kind of deal with some of the fallout and issues that we're seeing in our community around food insecurity. Those proposals will be prioritized. However, it is important to note that even if your proposal doesn't have a COVID response strategy at the heart of it, that doesn't mean that your proposal would not be funded or that it's not eligible. At the end of the day, what it comes down to is the quality of the proposals themselves. So you could have a proposal that had COVID response at its core, but was not well written or was not well thought out, didn't have a lot of community buy-in or didn't have a lot of community voice in terms of how it was crafted or how it will be implemented. And you could have, on the other hand, a proposal that didn't have a COVID response strategy around food security or food access at its core, but it was incredibly well written, and it had buy-in, it had things like letters of support, and it really was well thought out and well illustrated that it would be impactful to the community and had community voice as a part of it. In that particular instance, the COVID proposal would probably not receive funding over the non-COVID proposal. So it's very important to remember that just because COVID response is prioritized, that is not an automatic for funding, because it still comes down to the quality and the impacts of the proposal itself. So I just want folks to have that kind of at the center of what they're thinking about, right? Don't just create a proposal around COVID or change what might have been your original proposal to be something around a COVID response if that's not really what you're doing, because again, the COVID response, while prioritized, is not the end all be all towards eligibility or funding for this particular program. So another thing to keep in mind is around what is eligible for funding under this program. Just like seed grants before, this program is actually pretty flexible when it comes to what it funds. In some cases, you might have programs that only fund equipment or only fund staff time. For the community food access grants, that is not the case. It pretty much can pay for anything that is a supported project cost for, within your proposal, as long as it relates to food access and food security efforts. So just want folks to remember that as well, that the funding is very flexible. So we'll walk through the background letter. Again, the background letter and the application itself are hosted within the city's webpage that houses the 2021 community food system grants. So literally, if you just Google City of Madison Community Food Access Competitive Grants Program, it should take you right to that page. Otherwise, if you navigate through the city's site, it's available under the mayor's office, and you click on programs and you click on food, and it should be the first web page that's listed on the sidebar to the right of the food page. So those are kind of the different ways of navigating to actually get to the page where the background letter and the application, as well as other information, including this video, can be found. So in the background letter, there's a lot of helpful information. One of the things to be very aware of are when the proposals are due. They're due on January 29th, 2021 at 5 p.m. That is a Friday. And so you can submit applications to the email address that staff is using to kind of monitor this program. And that is MFPC, which stands for the Madison Food Policy Council, mfpc@cityofmadison.com. Please send your proposals there prior to this due date. So to jump into what is actually outlined in the background letter around the proposal process, any proposal will be considered that does the following things. If the proposal clearly outlines who is served, how they're served, and how community-based input on needs and impacts are obtained, that is a proposal that will be considered. If the proposal demonstrates positive impacts on communities of color and or low-income populations and also accounts for disparate impact in a demonstrable way, that is a proposal that will be considered. If the project works collaboratively with community members as a part of program design or a part of program implementation, that is something that reviewers will look towards in the proposal, and that is something obviously that we would consider for a proposal. And then the last thing, and this is obviously very important from a topical perspective, is that we want these proposals to be able to track and measure food access or food insecurity improvements that are happening through your proposal, right? How are you actually alleviating food access and food security issues within the community that you're working within? So a lot of that will also be laid out when I walk through the application in just a second. There's actually a whole section on evaluation, and we'll cover kind of how those metrics can be defined and measured in that particular section. So now we'll jump into the grant application. Again, the grant application is on that website and on that webpage I mentioned as a Word document so that it can be easily edited. And like I said, go through that, make sure you fill that out and get it in prior to the due date of January 29th at 5 p.m. So the grant application itself has 5 sections, plus a cover letter, plus a budget and personnel chart at the end of the application itself. So just to walk through these application sections, the cover letter itself, what staff and reviewers have found over the years working with the seed grants, because there was a time where we didn't require a cover letter, what we discovered was that in some cases, just based on the way proposals were written, it was actually really difficult to get a sense of what the applicant was trying to do until, halfway through reading the proposal. And so if you're waiting that long, even just to figure out what exactly is this organization talking about, what are they trying to do, you tend to miss things, on the front end of that. So the way we've kind of alleviated that problem is that we required a cover letter to come at the front of the application so that there's, a 500 word or less summary that provides the reviewer and provides staff with exactly, what the scope of the project is. And that makes it a lot easier than to review through all of the other parts of the application, because you've kind of, you've set your expectations of what the project is going to be, or at least laid out what the parameters of the project are going to be. And you have an idea of what that is as you go through and review it. So the cover letter is very important in that it provides that summary for reviewers. And like I said, 500 words or less, it's just a way to kind of set the parameters of what this project is for reviewers. Part 1 is applicant information. So these are just, basic information like the name of the organization, the address, whether it's incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit organization in Wisconsin statute. This, by the way, is not a requirement. You do not have to be registered or incorporated as a 501c3. In the case of organizations applying who are not 501c3s, what we would want to see is you partnering up with an organization that could work as your fiscal agent, because we as the city, if you were to receive funding, we do have to have a place to send that in terms of an organizational housing to send that. So a fiscal agent, if you're not an incorporated 501c3, is going to be an important part of your application to figure out. So again, the applicant information also includes, how much money you're requesting. Remember that the ceiling on these and the max for these grants are $25,000. So that'll be where you would list all of those things. And then under part 2 in project details, this kind of builds on some of the elements that were in the cover letter, but this is where you kind of explain your proposal and what it seeks to accomplish, as well as who you will be working with to implement this proposal. So other funders, potential community partners, other organizations or groups that are offering services, other governmental entities, so on and so forth. That's where you would put that information. In part 3, this is focused on kind of the COVID-19 response, the community impact, as well as the racial equity and social justice goals of your application. So this is where you would indicate what areas of Madison or Greater Madison your proposal will work in. It's important to understand that this is City of Madison funding. And so what we want to see are proposals that serve city residents. However, there should be a little caveat here that does not necessarily mean that the scope of the proposal can't be wider than the City of Madison. So if you had a project that was serving all of Dane County, that is absolutely fine as well, because the city is obviously a part of the county. But we do want to see kind of a priority placed on serving city residents, as this is city taxpayer dollars that is funding this program. So within that section, again, where you're serving or where your project is serving the community is going to be very important. Also, how your project is operating within that area is going to be important. And within that section where you're describing how your project or program will operate within the area you've denoted, this is also where you'll want to describe how you're reacting or serving needs that were brought on or exacerbated by COVID-19 in more detail. We also want to see how your proposal will serve the residents of the area you're working in, how you've engaged with members to either craft the approach to the project you're doing or how they will be a part of the implementation. It's very important to reviewers to see how community voice is incorporated into the project itself, right? How did you discern what the need was? How are community residents going to be a part of the project? And then the last part of that section really focuses on the beneficial impacts of your particular proposal to communities of color and or low income communities in the geography that you're working in. So that really focuses on the COVID-19 response, community impact, racial equity, and social justice component of the application. The next part is around evaluation. I think I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, that the evaluation component is very important. And the way that we've set this up is that we actually give the applicant the ability to define what their goals are and what success looks like in this program, as well as how they measure that success. So in the 2 questions that are housed under the evaluation section, we ask, what are the goals of your proposal? And these goals can be quantitative or qualitative. So they can be numbers based, or they can be kind of narrative based. In my experience, I found that, you know, having both of them work together is really effective, right? The numbers can kind of tell the impact, and then the narrative can support, I guess, the story behind the numbers. So if there's any way where you can tell and incorporate goals that are both quantitative and qualitative, that is usually very effective based on what we've seen through prior grants. So the second part of evaluation is just, how do you measure progress towards those goals? And it's listed at least 3 specific measures or benchmarks that would be used. Again, these are related to the goals you've set in the question above it. So you've now laid out what your goals are and what success is for your program. Now the question is, how do you measure that, and how do you show the benchmarks or the impacts of how you've reached those goals? So it's important to understand that you know, if you are to receive funding through this program, post grant period, right? So when the project has wrapped up, what city staff will do is actually follow up with you and provide an evaluation form that specifically asks you about this section, and says, what did you describe your goals as being? And then how did you describe meeting or achieving those goals? And then it'll ask, and did you meet those goals, right? And so that that post-grant evaluation form is going to provide the ability to actually weigh in on, you know, your ability to meet the goals you laid out. And we also understand that, you know, in real time, sometimes plans change and you have to make augments or, you know, modifications to your program. We want to hear all of that within kind of the post-grant evaluation section. And we understand that programs can change. So again, it's very important that you just lay out realistic goals that are achievable for your program, but also goals that can be measured and tracked, because that's what we're going to be looking for from an evaluation perspective post-grant. So the last couple of sections here focus on finances and budget. So part 5 is focused on financial need. These specifically ask, you know, how the money that you would obtain for this project or program would be dispersed. How are you going to use it? It also asks about the financial need that you, like the specific financial need that this project faces. So in some cases, you might have organizations that are applying for funds for a project that already has, let's say, 90% of the funding needed to accomplish what needs to happen in terms of the scope of that project, right? And so maybe the city's community food access grants provides the last 10% of that budget. But in some cases, there may be a proposal that, you know, has 25% of the funding or 50% of the funding, and this provides the other 50% or provides some key component of that funding as well. So it's just useful, because everyone is coming from a different place. It's useful to know kind of where the city's money through the community food access grant kind of fits into the larger puzzle of your total project. So that question is specifically laid out for that. The last 2 questions really focus on what funding you've already received or what funding might be contingent on city funding. That is very important from a reviewer perspective, because if you're asking us for $20,000, but that $20,000 basically unlocks or secures another $20,000, that is really important for a reviewer to know, because in many cases, you know, the city wants to be the entity that is helping organizations leverage other funding, right? Like, of course, we're happy to fund organizations outright with our money, but what we'd like to see is the funding that comes from the city actually be used to increase the funding or the financial impact of projects that we kind of seeded or assisted with. So it's really important to say, if you have other money that is really contingent on a match, and this funding provides that match, you know, we want to know that. Last question in financial need focuses around kind of project sustainability. So we want to know, for example, in out years, if you're not able to get the full amount to support this program, do you have plans in place to be able to streamline it or scale it back, but still have an impact? So that it's kind of our financial sustainability question, if you will. So the last 2 parts of this application are focused on budget summary and the personnel chart. So the budget summary is basically just a line item budget. It has columns for the budget item description, the total cost of the item, as well as how many city dollars you're requesting for this, and then how much you still need to secure, what has already been secured, or what is pending based on match or some other criteria for funding. So that is basically just where you lay out your line item budget around what the line item is, how much it costs, how much you want from the city, and what other funding you have to support it. The personnel chart is specifically focused on, I would say, wages and stipends. If you have, for example, a staffer you're going to hire, we want to know what the title of that staff position is, what the FTE status is, right? The full-time employment status. Is it a 50% person? Is it a 75% person? Is it a 100% person? We just want to know that percentage so we can get a sense of, I guess, the scale of work for that person. And then we also want to know what their hourly wage would be. In the case of wages versus stipends, if you're working with like a youth employment program, for example, and you're paying stipends, not wages, you can also put that. You can, and please make sure to actually identify and indicate that it's a stipend and not a wage, right? So if you're giving a lump sum, a one-time payment of $500, that's a stipend. It's not really a wage. And actually, from an accounting perspective on the city's end of thing, that's pretty important to know. So if you're doing stipends, whether it be for community members or for youth, please indicate that that is a stipend and not a wage. Very important for us to know that information. So that, really that's kind of it. That wraps up the kind of the walkthrough of the background letter and the application itself. I've plugged this email a couple of times, but I'll do it again here at the end. If you do have any additional questions for myself and for other staff that I'm working with on this, please email us at mfpc@cityofmadison.com. That's Madison Food Policy Council, mfpc@cityofmadison.com. We are monitoring that email inbox and we're responding to people pretty quickly, I would say. And so if you have any additional questions about this, I would highly recommend that you reach out, put your questions in there, and even include a phone number if you want to call back, because we're happy to do that as well. So thank you very much for your time. I really hope that this information and this session was useful to you, and I really look forward to seeing the kind of robustness and richness of proposals that come from the community for this particular program. Thanks for your time. Looking forward to hearing from you.